I've been wanting to build my own gaming PC forever now, but the GPU prices have just been absolutely crazy. But just recently, I was able to snag the RTX 5080 below MSRP, and I built my dream gaming PC around it. It's all built in the Fractal Design North XL, and if you're thinking about building your first PC, or you just love seeing epic setups, stick around because I'll walk you through every single part, the logic behind my choices, and the entire build process. Don't miss the final reveal because I think it's a beauty. Also, if you're thinking of copying this system or grabbing any of the components I've used, I have all the links in the description. Starting with the CPU, I went with the best gaming chip right now. This is the Ryzen 9800X3D. This CPU easily beats out Intel chips in gaming performance, and it's decent for productivity as well. But since this is a gaming PC, I'm prioritizing gaming performance. Next, for the motherboard, I went with the X870 Aorus Elite because I love the way that it looks, and most importantly, it's compatible with the AM5 platform which the Ryzen 9800X3D is built on. It has tons of space for future upgrades like Gen 5 SSDs, as well as 4 SSD slots. So if you want to build a system that can handle a lot of storage running at max speeds, going for the X870 motherboards is a must, but there is also the B850 motherboards as a second option. Moving on to the memory, I initially went for Corsair's 32GB Vengeance RAM kit, but later during testing, I realized that this wasn't the right fit, especially for 4K editing. So I went for the 64GB Corsair Dominator kit instead, which you'll see in the final reveal. Both of these kits are Expo compatible, which you'll definitely want with your AMD build, because that will let you use your full speed of your RAM, so watch out for that Expo sign on your RAM builds. Another step I also took before buying the RAMs is I checked the motherboard QVL list, which has all the compatible RAM for your motherboard. So make sure to check this list because it ensures that Expo will run smoothly. For storage, I got the reliable WD SN850X with 2TB capacity. If you have additional drives, make sure to install the Windows OS on your fastest one to get the best boot times. Now before diving into the rest of the parts, we have all that we need to start the build here and prep the motherboard. So the first step is going to be taking the motherboard out of its static bag and laying it on top of its box. Next, you'll see me here opening the CPU socket by pushing down on the lever, out and then up. Next, I lift the lid and grab the 9800X3D chip. These AM5 chips all have the pins on the motherboard socket, so you need to make sure that none of the pins are damaged or bent before you start, because if any of these pins are damaged, your new PC won't work. Next, I found and aligned the arrow on the top left corner of the CPU and the motherboard socket, and I gently put the processor into the socket, being careful not to push it or put any pressure on it. Next here, I lowered the lid and slowly lowered the lever back into its place. You'll see the lid pop off here, which is great, and you can store that away safely here. The next step is to install the RAM. So locate the RAM slots here, and this motherboard clearly marks where the first two sticks should be installed. So I push down on the levers on A2 and B2 and align the RAM sticks into the slots, and then push down firmly until the levers are clicked into place. Don't be afraid to push a little bit hard here because it will take some force to actually clamp them down. Ensure that you do seat the RAM properly and it clicks completely, otherwise you won't be able to boot the PC correctly later, and this is one of the most common problems here. Next, I installed the SSD. So since this is my main SSD, I use the main storage slot, which gives me the best speeds. To get inside, this motherboard has a toolless design, so all I did was just push the lever up here and then I lifted away the heatsink. I of course made sure to remove the stickers on both the heatsink as well as the SSD slot, and then I placed the SSD slowly into the slot and secured it with the mechanism inside. Finally, I put the heatsink back on. Next, I unscrewed the stock cooler bracket that comes pre-installed on the motherboard so that it's prepped and easier to install the AIO cooler later on. Now with those steps completed, the motherboard is ready to go into the case. And for that, I have the beautiful Fractal Design North XL. I picked it because it matches my walnut desk perfectly and it has top tier cooling performance as well as tons of space to build into. And I really wanted a 360 AIO, so this will fit that as well as any chunky graphics card. A small tip here is if you're going with a different case, always check that it fits the dimensions of your card and your desired CPU cooler, because GPUs these days are massive. But in general, the trendy fish tank cases look really futuristic, but I always recommend cases with a mesh panel on the front for the best cooling performance possible. Now coming back to the build, the next step is to take off all the panels to prepare for it. So the glass panel comes off with loosening the 2 thumb screws at the back and then pulling it and taking it out. The back panel comes off the same exact way, and then the top panel has this really nice leatherette tab which you can really easily pull and lift. Next, I lay down the case on its side, and what you'll see here is that the North XL comes with ATX motherboard standoffs pre-installed, which is super convenient. But this is also compatible with any size motherboard with extra standoff slots available on the right side. Next, I found the included accessories box, which is tucked away in the hard drive cage. This is going to have all the screws that we need, as well as some zip ties for cable management later. So I grabbed the motherboard and laid it down slowly into the case onto the standoffs, and then grabbed the standoff screws from the accessories box and secured the motherboard by screwing these into the case. From there, I wanted to hook up all the case cables for the front I/O as well as the fans and just get those out of the way. So the first cable we'll cover here is this USB 3 cable for the front 2 USBs. I inserted that into the motherboard on the right side into this USB 3 slot. Be careful when you're doing this and make sure that you're going in straight into it, because this slot is sensitive and the pins can get bent easily if you go in at an angle. Next, I grabbed the USB-C port cable and plugged that into the USB-C header on the motherboard. As you can see, I'm doing my best to use the closest opening to route the cables through for a clean look. Next, for the 3 140mm front fans, they're all hooked up to a fan hub in the back. This also has an extra free slot. The cable coming out of this will control all fans connected to the hub, which again is really nice and convenient right out of the box. So I plugged that into the system fan header at the bottom of my motherboard. Next, I grabbed the power button cables. These will go into the PLED headers at the bottom right of this motherboard. On my motherboard, it's labeled as F panel, which is usually for those connectors that combine everything, but this case comes with 3 separate connectors, so as per the motherboard, I used the top 3 left headers. Finally, I got the audio cable for the aux at the front of the case and plugged that into the HD audio header on the bottom left side of my motherboard. Now that we've installed the motherboard into the case and hooked up our initial cables, it's time to move to the power supply unit. I got Corsair's 1000 RMX with the latest ATX 3.1 for the added safety features, as well as extra headroom for future upgrades. It's also A+ rated in the PSU tier list, which is what you always want for a high-end build. Remember, in any case, to never cheap out on your PSU, because that's the most important part of your build for safety. Now, since this is a fully modular PSU, all the cables will be inside the box, and this comes with a lot of cables, but I'll only be plugging in the ones that I need. So I plugged in the 2 8-pin CPU cables that are clearly labeled here as CPU. This will power the 9800X3D. Then I plugged in the 24-pin cable. This powers the motherboard. Next, I plugged in the 12 2x6 cable that powers the GPU. And I also plugged in the PCIe cable from my AIO. As I'm doing this, I'm making sure that I plug them in properly and all the way in seated. To install the PSU into the case, remove the PSU bracket from the back using the 2 thumb screws, and then install this bracket onto the PSU with the included PSU screws. Then you'll see me here pull all the cables into the case first, and then pull the power supply unit slowly into place and secure the bracket again with the 2 thumb screws in the back. Now let's move on to the CPU cooler. Honestly, this was one of the hardest choices when picking the parts for this build. There are just so many coolers out there, but one thing that I knew for sure is that I wanted the 360mm cooler. So I went with Corsair's 360 Titan AIO for the best cooling and aesthetics as well. There are a few configurations of this AIO because the pump cap is actually removable and switchable. I got the one with the LCD screen to monitor temps, and because I think it looks awesome, and it will do an excellent job cooling the 9800X3D. So the first step I took here is take it out of the box, and one nice thing about this AIO is that all the fans come pre-installed onto the radiator, which saves a bunch of time. The pump also comes with pre-applied high-quality thermal paste, so I don't need to apply any paste manually here. That also comes with all the cables you need, as well as the iLink hub that controls everything, including the power and RGB. Now out of the box, the pump comes pre-installed with the LGA motherboard bracket, so because I'm using the AM5 motherboard, I swapped it out for the included AM5 bracket. And then after that, I placed the radiator at the top with one hand and put in the included small screws to hold it in place. All this while being careful not to touch the pre-applied thermal paste on the pump. Next, I carefully placed the pump on top of the CPU and secured it with the included screws in a zigzag fashion. From there, I adjusted the radiator to where I'm happy with it and then fully tightened all the screws on the top. In terms of wiring logic, it was pretty simple. The fan control cable goes into the hub and the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Then, all the parts in the system have an iLink port that looks like this. You can use this port to daisy chain any extra fans like I did here with the rear exhaust fan, and then plug that into the iLink hub. I also plugged in a USB-C cable into the pump head, and then the other end goes into the USB 2.0 header on the motherboard, and you also get this cable that plugs into the hub, and the other end also plugs into another USB 2.0 header in the motherboard. Now I'll cover off PC cooling here in general. The North XL comes with three 140mm fans in the front that are set up for intake, and you always want to set up your system to have roughly the same amount of air leaving it as is entering it to avoid negative pressure. This is where you have more air leaving the case than is entering, which can cause excessive dust buildup inside the case. Now since I installed my AIO with a pull configuration to exhaust the hot air out the top, if I were to stop here, then I'd have what is called positive pressure. This is where you have more air coming into the case than there is leaving, because the three 140mm fans at the front take in more air than these smaller 120mm fans up top. To add to that, the radiator mesh panel causes some restriction for the air leaving as well. Now positive pressure is fine and is better than negative pressure, but I wanted to completely balance things out, so I added one more fan in the back as an exhaust fan, which is a Corsair RX 120 fan, matching my AIO, and since the three 140mm fans are equivalent to four 120mm fans in performance, this is now roughly balanced. Now installing the exhaust fan was super easy. I just used the four included screws and connected it to the radiator with an iLink cable. Finally, to power everything, you'll have an included adapter inside that connects to the hub on one end and the PCIe cable from the power supply unit on the other end. Now before moving on to the graphics card, I did another round of plugging in all the components I've installed so far. So I routed and plugged in the 24-pin cable to power the motherboard, and I routed the two CPU 8-pin cables to the top left section of the motherboard here and plugged those in. And I also double checked that all the other cables I've plugged in so far are nice and secure. Now moving on to the most exciting, most nerve-wracking, and the most expensive part of this whole build, the gorgeous Gigabyte Aorus 5080 Gaming OC. I absolutely love the design of the Aorus cards, and these are the cards I've been watching for a while now. So when I saw it on discount over $100 under MSRP, I picked it up immediately. Now getting into the box, there is a ton of foam in here and it protects it perfectly. Next, I took it out of the static bag, and then I made sure to take off all of the plastic protective wrap on it, which is at the top as well as the fans. Now looking at this thing, it is really chunky and big and is very heavy, so this is going to be nerve-wracking to install. Now Gigabyte also includes a really nice sag bracket to stop it from sagging down and getting damaged over time. Now I set that aside and it's time to install it. So I took out a few of the shields in the back of the case and got the GPU aligned in with the main PCIe slot on the motherboard, and then pushed it and clicked into place. From there, I secured it into the case at 2 points, One was at the back where I took out the brackets previously, and then on the other end, I installed the included side bracket. So now with a big sigh of relief and the most nerve-wracking part of the build behind me, I routed the 12 2x6 power cable and plugged that into the card. Now make sure you hear a click here and that the cable is plugged in all the way, because this cable is notorious for being super sensitive. I basically made sure that the cable is not bent at the connection and gave it at least a few centimeters to allow for enough slack before bending it down gently. Now one final tip with these cables is that the new ATX 3.1 cables on a lot of these power supply units have a different color for the connectors. So in my case, it's gray, and some MSI PSUs have it in yellow. So this will help you see if the cable is plugged in all the way. So if there's any gap between them, you can see that different color very easily and spot it early on. Now for some final steps, I went over all of the connections again and made sure that everything is secure before I move on. And then I spent some time doing some cable management in the back with the enclosed zip ties and made sure that everything looks pretty decent before securing and putting all the panels back on. Now, enjoy the final reveal. So after a super long time of dreaming and thinking and picking up all the parts, I'm super thrilled with how this build turned out. The North XL case was super spacious and easy to build in, and it looks amazing here with my walnut desk, and I think I achieved a really nice balance between gaming and some really nice ambient aesthetics as well.